Hello, comrades. Today we have an unscheduled episode because I received cables from Novosibirsk. These are two power cables and an RCA cable. The cable is from a subscriber, from Alexander, who watches my channel, and he sent me his own work, meaning these are homemade cables, which in his opinion are high-end cables and ready to compete with Nordost, Wire World, the most expensive ones, and probably even with Siltec. I didn't ask Alexander, but I think that he is confident that his cables will beat them. I'll be honest, I'm not really fond of this kind of product because I believe that people who work at factories earn good money from this, have access to serious materials, get paid, and overall can afford serial production. In theory and in practice, they always outpace those who sit alone, making things, trying out some innovations. Let's say to launch your own product like this, but there are exceptions. It'll be interesting to compare them visually first, and then we'll definitely connect this cable and this cable as well. And of course the Varvad Platinum Electro, this is my cable taken from my home system, and we'll listen with binaural microphones to hear how it sounds. Because my previous episode about cables, specifically about this one where I compared it to a regular no-name cable, showed, friends, that you, the listeners and viewers of my channel, are generally very knowledgeable about acoustics and the differences in sound, even in cables like these. Because, strangely enough, in my Telegram group, a lot of people were able to tell the difference between the cables. This one and this one, this is the regular one, when they were simply connected to the amplifier. Moreover, some of my more experienced subscribers were actually able to identify all the nuances, how this cable is different, what, let's say, its imbalances are, and what the tonal differences are between the regular cable and the super expensive one that costs 400,000 rubles. They even said that the soundstage was also a bit different, and you know, it was nice for me to hear and read that, because binaural microphones, by the way, where are they? Friends, where are my binaural microphones? Here they are. They're working because technology doesn't stand still, and with microphones like these, again, you can emulate the environment of this room to hear the stereo, the panorama, and to really understand the subtle details, because many people record in unclear ways with who knows what microphones, and of course, for them there's no difference, but they probably don't even hear it themselves. But we experienced people, of course, trust our ears first and foremost. And if you have the chance to listen to a recording made with binaural microphones, then, of course, on good speakers or with good headphones, you should be able to feel it, even these tiny differences, not to mention how the stereo system itself sounds. For example, recently on my channel, there was a video where I compared our Premier acoustic systems, which cost around 50,000 rubles, and Martin Logan, which are now the Motion 40i. They cost 400,000, well, almost 9 to 10 times more expensive. And again, people very skillfully, not everyone, but some, were able to tell that the Martins had a more precise, more accurate, and faster bass. With our speakers, the bass was, let's say, more powerful and deeper, but not as accurate. Again, there was a difference in the highs as well, but as you can see, all of this can be heard. So friends, let's move on to the external inspection. I take it in my hand and realize, you know, I did a pretty good job. Of course, it's completely different from this no-name cable. The look and feel inside are totally different. I can feel that there are 3 separate conductors in there, not bundled together like in this cable or here, where you see it's kind of a single core. But inside, of course, they're separated as well. But in our cable, you can actually feel each individual wire. Phase, ground, and neutral. There can't be anything else. But the cross-section isn't very large. I like the plug. It's quite nice looking. You see here, there's already a label that says power cable. But here, for example, there isn't one. Probably just didn't have time to stick it on. It's good, solid quality. But again, if we compare, let's free up the plug itself, and you'll see that it's gold-plated. 16 amps, 250 volts. If we compare it to WireWord, of course, there it will be silver-plated. This is copper, oddly enough, with silver. Although, when I was doing the review, I was surprised that the cable is so expensive, and yet they didn't make the plug entirely out of silver. But that's a bit wrong, they cut corners. Although the conductors there are actually made of silver and monocrystalline copper, which is drawn in Taiwan because there aren't many factories that produce this kind of monocrystalline product. Did you know that? At the Bauman Moscow State Technical University, monocrystalline silver films less than 35 nanometers thick were obtained for the first time in the world. That's how it is. And you say that monocrystals and so on are all nonsense, and that oxygen-free copper is also a myth. No, my friends, all of this is real. And if you disagree, please write in the comments. This cable here is copper inside, and the manufacturer, its designer Alexander, tells me that he doesn't like silver. It sounds radically different. Overall, I agree with him. By the way, Alexander, the designer, has a higher education, and that's always great when you're involved in this kind of work. I think it was the Novosibirsk State Technical University. He graduated from there. I always ask about that, well, because it's interesting. For example, I also have a higher education, and I know how hard it is. I was always working on my master's thesis. I even started a PhD dissertation, but I didn't finish it. So I really understand how innovations are introduced into our world, what a graduation project is, how articles and reviews are written, and in general what the process is and how all these innovations, so to speak, are defended, and how difficult it can be sometimes to gather enough material for a quality dissertation. And of course, then you have to defend it. And as for you, friends, have you had any experience using homemade or commercial cables? Or do you just use these kinds and basically think that all audiophiles around are fools and that there's no point in overpaying? Please write in the comments. We've already been chatting quite a bit with Alexander on WhatsApp, and he has a lot to say. He sent me different setups, serious setups with very expensive components, like those same Nordos cables, top tier, near top tier Valhallas. And again, Alexander always wrote that his cables easily outperform foreign manufacturers. Test setup. Alexander also had serious setups because there were Perliston, Utopias, and expensive Martins. In general, there are no problems with components in Novosibirsk. It's wonderful that people are listening and getting into it. High-end audio. The price of this product is 50,000 rubles, which compared to, say, Platinum Electro, is significantly cheaper, about 5 times less. By the way, this interconnect cable is made in an interesting way. Take a look, you see it's directional. Again, people often write that directionality in cables is complete nonsense. What do you think? For example, I've always tried to connect them according to the arrows, as the manufacturer recommends. Of course, inexpensive cables don't have any arrows, and usually I just go by the label. But top-tier cables are always directional. Moreover, Alexander and I have corresponded. He even tries to determine the directionality on other cables. For example, here's Kimber cable. He sent it, it didn't have any direction marked, but let's say by listening he was able to determine the direction himself. Well, I can say that, of course, if that's really the case, if a person can actually hear it and knows their system so well that they can even determine the direction of a cable, then that's really impressive. That's top-level skill. Most people don't bother with this at all. By the way, back in the day, when I was really getting into hi-fi and high-end, one of the first cables I bought with my own money, I saved up for a long time with the help of friends. At one point I bought a cable from a company, very British, especially loved by the distributor Airword and I think Vandenholt. By the way, all of them were directional. I still remember it clearly. I came home with it. I had a PSP Image T6 system. I hooked it up, and at first I didn't really notice anything. I didn't overthink it. But the fact that I had bought a fairly expensive cable warmed my soul, so to speak, so I just left it and didn't worry about it. Later I started swapping them out myself and listening. And honestly, that was the real wow effect. The biggest impression about the different sounds of cables was made on me by Oleg Blaživ with his Nordos tests, when he would swap out power cables and speaker cables one after another, and there really was a significant difference. That's why I believe Alexander when he talks about this. His creation delivers such a warm, let's say, inviting tube sound. Although, for example, I'm not really a fan of that kind of sound. I'm more about speed and quickness. Clarity that's closer to, let's say, a studio sound. But still, high-end sound is a must, because studio sound isn't perfect either. You get tired of it quickly. But with my Bowers and Bristons, well, I can listen for about an hour and a half, maybe 2, and then I always try to make sure the information really presses down on me. After that, I try to, let's say, step away, but if I'm listening in the background, I can go for longer. But that's a slightly different kind of listening, background listening. Still, I move away from that and prefer to do it the same way I watch movies. That is, I specifically sit down download some serious content, 20, 30, 40 gigabytes, even more, up to 100, and I watch it from start to finish. It's the same with music. I come, get in the right mood, listen to the tracks I like, and then leave. I try not to listen to music in the car, and I don't listen to music in headphones either. There should be a certain culture to it. So here's the thing. 18 years of research, you can really tell that the person put their soul into these cables, and it shows. And that's what makes it even more interesting to listen now. Let's probably pick 2 tracks and play this cable for a few minutes each. Actually, no, let's start with this one, then Alexander's, and then Wire World is already some heavy artillery. Yes, it's not Odin, but still it's a top tier cable, a serious monocrystal from CC Silver, so... And you friends, write your thoughts in the comments. On YouTube, there will be short fragments, but to really feel all the nuances, all the differences in sound, let's say, to listen to a track almost from start to finish, you'll need to go to my Telegram group where we post exactly that. Exclusive, serious, interesting content where there's a chat, and again, people who are into this topic are there. The QR code is on the right. Subscribe and let's listen. So friends, try to figure out which cable will play. This one here for a couple hundred rubles, the one for 50,000, or the homemade one. But made by someone who really knows what they're doing and truly loves acoustics, that's for sure. Because the amount of material he sent me really shows that he knows his stuff. Or maybe this Wire World Platinum Electra, which costs nearly 400,000 rubles, monocrystals, silver, innovations, and so on. Let's listen and choose. Write in the comments which one you liked best.